So here's what is true. There is an active federal probe into possible tax fraud, money laundering, and foreign lobbying crimes committed by Hunter Biden. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors are reportedly looking into multiple international financial and business dealings involving Hunter, dating back to when Joe Biden was still vice president, with an apparent focus on Hunter's business dealings in Ukraine, China, and Kazakhstan. Federal investigators are believed to have interviewed a wide range of potential witnesses, including lobbyists connected to Hunter, his business partners, and even a woman he had a child with in 2018. Prosecutors are reportedly particularly interested in income and payments Hunter received while serving on the board of Ukraine energy company Burisma, as well as how he paid off tax obligations in recent years. They're also said to be digging into the possibility that Hunter shifted money around from company to company in order to hide his real tax liability. For instance, while Hunter held a board seat on Burisma, he was paid around $50,000 a month. That money would first go to a Delaware-based company called Rosemont Seneca Bohai LLC before being passed along on to Hunter. Now, one specific area of interest for investigators, Rosemont Seneca's 2014 purchase of a Fisker sports car for Hunter to use. The car cost more than $142,000 and appears to have been paid for with that money that came from a Kazakh businessman. According to a former associate of Hunter's who's been questioned by prosecutors, the man in question had sought business opportunities with Hunter in the U.S. and elsewhere and had close ties to Kazakh leadership. Prosecutors have reportedly also been interested in Hunter's business interests in China, including his dealings with CEFC, China Energy, a massive oil and gas company that reportedly had financing from and ties to the Chinese government. And there are questions about a massive diamond Hunter received as a gift from a CEFC executive, even though he didn't appear to do any kind of formal deal with him. Now, it's not just financial crimes that prosecutors seem to be interested in. Authorities are also said to be looking into whether Hunter Biden or others violated foreign lobbying laws through work with a PR firm called Blue Star Strategies. Burisma had hired Blue Star to help bolster its reputation after State Department officials criticized its founder. And while the DOJ investigation has yet to wrap up, some Republicans are already reportedly prepping their own investigation into Hunter into the event that they retake the House in this year's midterms. As of right now, we know that Hunter paid roughly $1 million in back taxes that he owed. Some believe that could help protect him from further action from the feds. Prosecutors have not indicated much about the investigation, and Hunter has denied any wrongdoing. Now, to date, no credible allegations of criminal misconduct by President Biden himself have been uncovered, nor is he believed to be under investigation as part of this probe. We will discuss what, if anything, Joe Biden knew later in the show. And it's worth noting that President Biden has allowed his Department of Justice to continue to investigate his son criminally, even allowing the same federal prosecutor who investigated Hunter Biden under President Trump to complete the investigation. So, to make sense of this first part of this, let's bring in former federal prosecutor Shan Wu and former Assistant U.S. Attorney Kim Whaley. Thank you to both of you for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, Shan, let me start with you. Of all of the assorted legal things that are being investigated right now, what do you think seems to be the greatest threat legally to Hunter Biden right now?
I think it's the Foreign Agents Registration Act, what they call FARA. And the reason for that is that's a statute which had been not really used very much until maybe about 6 years ago when the department revived it. Since then, I think as befits the more global interactions in business, they've been using that much more vigorously, bringing prosecutions under that. And I'd say, looking at what we know publicly, there is what looks to be a prima facie basis for looking at that case. He was involved with a foreign entity, and that would fit the definition under FARA. So I think that's probably the biggest exposure for him right now, because I think DOJ is very interested in that.
Kim, how significant is it that Hunter Biden paid this $1 million in back taxes?
Well, of course, there's two components to any sort of sentencing for a conviction on these. One would be a financial component, and the other would be some prison time. As Shan indicated, the FARA up to 12 years in prison there. The prosecution would take that into account, as well as the fact that he paid that money back, but as well as the fact that he has drug addiction problems, that he lost his brother, that he went through a terrible divorce. All of these crimes require some showing of criminal intent, willfulness. And we saw this out of New York with the Trump Organization. It's very hard to prove the mindset to show tax fraud, to show money laundering, to show a FARA violation. So that's really, I think, the wrinkle for the prosecution, in addition to, as you indicated, his attempts to sort of make good on these problems.
And people forget that a lot of the time when someone doesn't pay their taxes, it's dealt with civilly, right? Either you pay it back or you potentially pay fines for not doing it. To rise to the level of criminality is sort of a different issue. Real quick, Shan, let me ask you about this diamond that he received. I mean, it's so bizarre that he gets this diamond that's worth, thousands of dollars as a gift. He doesn't know what happened to it. Is that a potential criminal problem for him?
Well, I don't know exactly what that crime would be. We can't construe it as a bribe at the moment. But if he was trying to hide getting something of value, that could be an issue. But certainly any investigator with a nose is going to be trying to run that down.
Yeah. All right. The good news is you both are here with me for the hour, so we have plenty of time to talk about a variety of issues. Coming up, a lot about the Hunter Biden investigation is murky, but one thing is clear. His dealings with a shady Ukrainian energy firm will bring Hunter's connection to Burisma into focus and talk about whether that could be a legal problem for him. Next. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.